All right, so here we're going to look at explosive strength in jump training, look at some of the different exercises that you can utilize to enhance these qualities. So when you're looking at this, you have a bunch of different things you could look at. So you have lower body exercises, upper body exercises. You have combination variations. So usually the combinations involve some type of dynamic throw with a medicine ball coupled with triple extension of the lower body or even a jump associated with that. So again, the idea here is to think of the goal of the exercise. So you're not always looking to necessarily improve explosive strength depending upon how you're actually carrying the exercise out. So for instance, everybody thinks that Olympic lifts are used to improve explosive strength. And while you can program an Olympic lift to possibly do that, it's not the lift itself because it depends upon the intensity at which you're doing it at. It would even be the same thing as a jump. Most jumps when they're done just with body weight are done to improve explosive strength, but depending upon the type of jump, if you add resistance to it, you could start to develop, be more apt to develop other qualities associated with the jump. So we're going to look a little bit here at kind of the science behind jump training, or what commonly gets kind of classified as plyometrics. So you first have all of these begin with a fast eccentric contraction, so a fast lengthening, followed by what's called an amortization phase. So the amortization phase is the brief period that you have between the eccentric and concentric contraction, and then the fast concentric contraction. So each one of these phases plays an important role in the development of the qualities that you get out of performing jumps in plyometrics. So again, the eccentric, just to reiterate, the eccentric is obviously the lengthening component. We've talked about eccentric contractions. Obviously, when you're doing them for explosive strength, they tend to be done in a fast manner. So you get a fast eccentric contraction followed by a fast concentric, with the amortization phase being the time in between the two phases of the exercise. Now here's some ways that the lower body exercises get classified. So, and I'm going to refer you to your essentials textbook to kind of look through and see different variations of this. So you have jumps in place, standing jumps, multiple jumps and hops, bounds, box drills, and depth jumps. Okay, so a jumps in place is essentially when you're jumping and landing in the same spot. That's a jumps in place. Okay, standing jumps are basically one-time jumps. Okay, so you do one maximum effort broad jump, or you do one maximum effort vertical jump. Okay, multiple jumps and hops involves kind of a combination of the first two. Okay, so multiple jumps and hops kind of combines that. That would be something like your, repeatedly jumping over hurdles would be an example of that. Bounds are exercises, are jumping exercises that replicate parts of the running cycle. So if you look in your book, you could see different variations of bounds. Box drills are just any type of drill that involves a box. And then you have depth jumps. Depth jumps, the key with them is that they are the most aggressive form of plyometrics. So anytime you're stepping off of a box or landing from a height, that would be considered a depth jump. So you're basically landing, and immediately upon hitting the ground, you're jumping in the air. Okay, depth jumps are very effective, but they're also very intense. So again, that's the most aggressive form of lower body exercise as it relates to jump training. Then as we look at the upper body, so the upper body, you have your plyometric push-up variations, so that could involve, again, doing them off of boxes. It could also just involve just doing push-ups where you're, dynamically pressing yourself up into the air and your hands are leaving the ground. Various types of medicine ball throws as well. can be deemed plyometric depending. Now, see, again, this depends on how they're performed. For a medicine ball throw to be considered a plyometric, it has to involve some sort of rebound, okay? So you could do a medicine ball throw for explosive abilities. It doesn't necessarily make it a plyometric. It kind of depends upon how you actually carry out the throw when you're performing it. Then you have your combination activities. So these are your different throws and jumps. So it's basically combining a medicine ball and a throw along with a jump. I'm going to show you some variants of this in class, but these are really valuable activities. You know, as far as being able to develop triple extension, you can do that with these types of activities, and I think they're a little easier to teach. Again, Olympic lifts tend to be a very popular way of training triple extension, but by doing activities like this, you actually make them a lot easier to teach. It doesn't give the person as much to have to think about when they're actually doing the exercise. And then as you kind of advance and do some different things, there's more advanced training methods. One of these is something called complex training. So complex training utilizes what's called post-activation potentiation. So essentially what you do here is you combine a heavier resistance training exercise with a plyometric activity. So for instance, you would do a heavy squat variation somewhere in the range of 85 to 95% for about, you know, three repetitions. And then from there, you would immediately go and carry out a type of jump, okay? Like just say even for instance, a box jump, okay? The idea is you kind of heighten the nervous system activity with the heavier weighted activity, and then that allows for then when you go to express it through the more explosive activity, you can actually get more out of performing that one. It's sort of the same idea. If you ever notice batters in the batting box, you know, the batter's box during a baseball game, they swing the weighted bat. Well, you swing a weighted bat a little bit, and then you go and pick up the regular bat. The regular bat feels lighter. It's the same idea. Okay, so it's called post-activation potentiation. It is a very aggressive form of training, so it isn't something that a beginner would use, but it is something that can be incorporated, you know, once somebody gets a little bit more training experience and has good mechanics and good strength associated with the activities. And another very important consideration is landing mechanics. So particularly when you start to get into your higher intensity plyometrics, depth jumps, things of that nature, you want to make sure that an individual can absorb the landing well and land in good positions. Okay, so you know, especially injury prevention, we know the issues associated with non-contact ACL injuries and the problems associated with that. So you want to make sure that you're progressing accordingly and that the individual has good landing mechanics. If you look at the picture that I have here, okay, you can see from a sagittal view, really good alignment. Okay, so her hips are back, her shoulders, you know, her shoulders are in a pretty good alignment with her knees aren't coming too far forward. Okay, you have good landing mechanics here. What you wouldn't want to see from a sagittal view is you wouldn't want to see the knees shifting too far forward. If you saw that, that would mean that you know, she has some hamstring and glute weakness that's preventing her from landing well. Obviously, from the frontal view, which I don't have in this picture here, you want to make sure that the knees aren't caving into valgus, because then what that would tell you is that athlete, would call that athlete a ligament dominant athlete, and that athlete is putting way too much strain on the passive structures, particularly the ACL when they do that. The landing mechanics you're seeing here are pretty good. The shoulders and knees in alignment, the knees kind of aligned over the forefoot, no further, and the hips are kind of sitting back, so she's not exhibiting any type of glute and hamstring weakness here. Okay, so what I'm just showing you here, and we'll give more examples in class, is just showing you one sequencing example. So you see here 5 exercises. So this would actually be an example of a sequence you could perform over the course of a couple months to progress the jumping. So start with single standing jumps, then you'd have multiple jumps with forward displacement, multiple jumps without forward displacement, jumps with overload, which are just going to be weighted jumps, whether that's jumping with holding, dumbbells, using a weighted vest. You can do jumps with a barbell on your back. You just do have to be careful because obviously there's going to be some compression things there on the spine. So you just want to watch that, particularly in athletes that don't have a whole lot of good core stability. And then obviously depth jumps being the last thing you would progress to. So what you're essentially doing here is, so say for instance, for the first 4 weeks, you'd primarily be doing single standing jumps. By week 4, you would already start to incorporate, or maybe even a little earlier than that, depending on the athletes, you would start to incorporate the multiple jumps and the multiple jumps with forward displacement within the training week. Then obviously at some point you'd gradually phase out the single standing jumps, be working with multiple jumps with forward displacement only, and then gradually progress them to multiple jumps without forward displacement. Same idea, and have a gradual progression into that. Then do the same with jumps with overload, and then the same obviously with depth jumps. Again, the volume of depth jumps is going to be pretty low when you go to do them because they do impose a lot of central nervous system stress coupled with orthopedic stress because you're constantly landing from a height. So you want to make sure, again, you'd obviously want to make sure landing technique is very good with that. I've always, in my experience working with a lot of athletes, anytime I was progressing athletes to depth jumps, they would actually do a block where they would do what are called depth drops. Again, it's not classically a plyometric drill, it's more a drill to teach deceleration and landing. But what they would do with that is land from the box and not do the jump. They would just land and hold, make sure that they're able to actually decelerate the movement before they transition into depth jumps. Okay, so again, they're not classically a plyometric. They do teach the body to decelerate, which is important, but they can be done as a way to eventually progress someone into doing depth jumps. Okay, so that concludes this. We'll discuss more in class and give some examples as to how you could accomplish these goals of improving explosive strength abilities.